you can't understand Esther on its own. All the exegetical work in the world will not mine out the truth of Esther because it's not there. There's no internal motivation revealed. There's no commentary. There's no point made. It's just a story, and a godless story at that. Esther is like the events of your life. There are so many events and circumstances and days and seasons and years that you simply will not be able to understand on its own. To understand Esther, we have to step back and read Esther in light of the entire biblical canon. Because the good news of Esther, that Esther couldn't see, that is without Esther, there is no good news. Unless God did an extraordinary work through ordinary circumstances and broken people, the Jews would not have survived, the seed of David would not have been preserved, and King Jesus would have never showed up. And the banner that the book of Esther waves is that in the hour of God's seemingly conspicuous absence, he is powerfully and profoundly present.
In a story that never once mentions God, the people of God find themselves exiled in a strange land under the rule of a foreign king. With their enemies plotting to destroy them, all hope appears to be absent. But one very unlikely character is raised to a position of remarkable power, because even when we can't see him, he's working.
Title of my sermon, A Tale of Two Kings. A Tale of Two Kings. We're starting this story off of Esther, and we noted last week it's a unique story in the history and in the canon of the Bible because it's the only story that never directly mentions God. No priests, no prayers, no prophetic vision, no mention of the temple, no people of God, no miracles. Just this random, godless story stuck in the middle of the Old Testament. What is it there for? Well, as we read through the book, we're going to see that the author uses the tool, the writing tool of comparing and contrasting to help us see some very important things. And in chapter 1, I believe he's using the compare and contrast tool to demonstrate and to paint a portrait of two distinctly different kings. And so if you've got your Bible, we're going to look at chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to take a look at the profile of king number 1. Chapter 1, verse 1. The first king we're going to meet is King Xerxes. And we're going to ask ourselves, what can we learn about King Xerxes in this book? Now remember, last week we saw authors use facts and details on purpose. So if they include details, it's for a reason. And if they exclude details, it's for a reason. So every detail left out and every detail included means something. In fact, in biblical narrative, this is the longest and most detailed description of any pagan king in the entire Bible, and the most detailed description of any kingdom outside of a description of the temple of God in Jerusalem. So it's a lot of detail. We want to ask ourselves, why is it there, and what is it helping us see about this particular king? And the first thing we see is that King Xerxes' reign was vast. Chapter 1, verse 1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Cush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. This is an historical figure that's confirmed by both biblical narrative and secular historians of the Greek realm who are documenting the rise of the Persian Empire. So you got King Cyrus, and he dies, and you have King Darius who conquers Babylon, and he dies, and then you have King Xerxes come to the throne, and he is overseeing a vast kingdom. It's a growing kingdom. They are conquering and consolidating all of their enemies so that he is at this time overseeing just about 3 million square miles of property. Okay? That's almost the size of the United States. In that kingdom, there are almost 50 million subjects. Now, at the time, there's only about 114 million people on the planet. So King Xerxes is overseeing almost half of the world's population in this kingdom. Moreover, it's not like they're all speaking the same language from the same race. This is different tribes, different races, different languages that he is overseeing from the Mediterranean Sea north through like modern day, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, all the way down to Egypt and Africa. I mean, he is overseeing a ton of people. There is no question at this time, King Xerxes' reign was vast, and that's what we see here with the detail given. Secondly, we see that King Xerxes' rule was ultimate. It was ultimate. Look at verse 3. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were all present. Here's what's impressive about that. Again, we're asking ourselves, what is this story and the detail therein telling us about this king? Here's what's impressive about that. You just heard me rattle off all the different kind of nations and tribes and tongues represented. How many people in the history of the world have gotten all of those folks to get along? Oh, like none. Right? Peace in the Middle East, that's a dream, except under King Xerxes. His rule was ultimate, and it's demonstrated in his convening power. When he says show up, they all come. That was something few people, if any, have been able to do with that area until that time, and very few, if any, maybe none, have done since. When he said show up, they came because his rule was ultimate. And when they showed up, these were not like, weak, limp-wristed. These were like alpha male warriors, some of them, and many of them, kings in their own rights, that King Xerxes declared himself king over. So he is, by a self-definition, he was a king of kings. I am king over many kings. I am lord over many lords. I am the ultimate ruler and authority in your life. That was his self-declaration and how he set himself up. But the details go on. Not only was his rule and reign extensive and ultimate, King Xerxes' wealth was extravagant. Look at the description, verse 4. For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days, a little party cap here, in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of whatever. Marble, mother of pearl. You want me to try to say it, don't you? Porphyrirer. And Auntie Tara will tell me this afternoon how to say that. And other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other. Now look at that. Wine was served. we threw a Christmas party this Christmas, and we thought, "Ooh, this would be nice. We'll get some nice wine." We don't partake ourselves, don't have a clue what to get, but you can get like the box wine, at Costco. I found out, or you can get like the French wine. They give them the fancy names to make people feel important when they say them, even though they don't know what it means. And so I got one of those wines, and I took it to my house, and I'm like, open it up, and someone said like, "You got to let it breathe." I'm like, "Let it breathe? What is it? What is it? A rat or an animal? Like a bird? It's wine. You got to let it breathe, okay?" And then we're like, "Hey, what are we going to pour them in?" I'm like, I don't know, like you're right from the bottle. So we had to go borrow wine glasses, and then we found some from our wedding that we had in boxes and storage we never pulled out. Cut the box, pull it out, and we had wine glasses, and my wine glass had a little silver thing on top of it that we had been given our wedding. I'd never seen it before. I'm like, I have wine goblet glasses things with silver on top. Look at me. You know how many I had? 12. And they were all the same. This guy has enough to feed and drink 15,000 men, and every one of them different. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, because we all know that if you're going to drink wine, you got to drink royal wine, or you don't like the Costco box wine. You want the royal wine, right? Anybody in here like wine? I got no clue what I'm talking about. Nobody? Okay, well, we'll keep going. Jimmy, you know where liars go. By the command... see here, wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man as he wished. So let's just get a picture of what's going on here. This is a massive display of extraordinary opulence, wealth, power. This is lavish party. This is like Mardi Gras meets, spring break Cancun meets like, the college dorm that you grew up in, party in the Greek section of UW. Okay, what's that called? What? system, the Greek system. It's called, it's going to bug me now. Greek row. There's not a word I'm looking for here. It's third service, so we don't care. What is it again? It's called, it's like a frat house. There it is. Thank you. Someone say frat house? A frat house. Is that right, Dave? Dave's like, this guy didn't get much sleep last night. Well, you're right. So this is like Mardi Gras meets, spring break Cancun meets frat house party with grown men with money. Like there could not be like a worst case scenario here, okay? We're talking like every nefarious motive and event that you think might happen when men have access to all the food they can eat and all the drink they can drink and all the women they want is happening. Like not trying to like make you go somewhere you shouldn't go, but as perverted as you can think, this is what's going on, okay? This is like King Xerxes would make Hugh Hefner look JV, okay? King Xerxes is like varsity dirtbag. Opulence, lavish parties. And think about the last time you hosted a party, okay? There was like 6 people, and you had your pastor over for his birthday, and it was a great time, and he gave him tons of presents, and he fixed him steak, ribeye Jimmy, and it was just a great party. And then your pastor left. He didn't do dishes. He didn't clean up the mess he spilled on the floor when he knocked over his Arnold Palmer, because that's what he likes to drink when he's going to really let her rip. And it was just like, man, this is exhausting. And it took you a week to recover from hosting 6 people on a Sunday night. You ever been there? Xerxes hosts 15,000 alpha male warrior dudes at his house for how long? 180 days. That is the party to end all parties. If you're into hostessing, you're into hospitality, just the sheer logistics of this event alone is mind-blowing. And when they show up at one of his 4 palaces, because who wants just one palace? He's got 4, just in case one palace blew a tire and he needed to pivot to the second palace, okay? So he's got like winter palace, summer palace, spring palace, just because palace. He's got all these palaces, and when people come, they sit down, they're like, oh my goodness, what's that couch made of? Gold. That's amazing. What's that couch made of? Gold. That's incredible. What's that couch made of? We went down to the flea market. Silver. That's amazing. How many couches do you have here? Enough to seat about 15,000. Mind blowing, right? We bought, Sharon and I bought our first new piece of furniture when we moved in to our house. And when we built our house, we set aside $3,000 to buy furniture for our new house. Give you a little idea of how disconnected we are from reality. We never bought a piece of new furniture in life. We're all about goodwill and garage sales for the first 16 years of our marriage. So I set aside $3,000. I give it to my mom. I say, don't let me touch it. If I ask for it, put a gun to my face and then remind me that I have it in 2 years when I finish this house. So 2 years later, she comes back. She says, here's the money. What'd you want it for? I said, I'm going to buy my wife some new furniture. And she started laughing. I found out later why she was laughing. I went to the store. Do you know how much they charge you for a pillow? About $9 million. And it goes on sale, and they drop it to $6 million. And so we buy a couch, and we're like, we got $3,000. They're like, well, we'll give you 2 pillows, and you can come back later, and you can buy the rest of the couch, and you got more money. I mean, we didn't get hardly anything for $3,000, and this guy has gold-laden, gold-covered furniture enough to seat and house 15,000 people. On top of that, there are entire portions of his palace that are dedicated to housing his harem. I mean, these are where the most beautiful women in the land, according to his calculations, go, and they're there at his beck and call to meet whatever nefarious motives and desires he may have at any given moment of any given day. And then, so they're over there partying, and then the women that are at this party are women that he is paid to bring in to keep the 15,000 soldiers happy. Okay? Again, this guy would make Hugh Hefner look like I said, the C-Squad. This is an absolute out-of-control party to demonstrate that his wealth was extravagant. Nobody could equal this king's wealth, and it was done on purpose. Next, we learn about this king that his glory was unmatched. Look at verse 4. His glory was unmatched. For the full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor of his glory, and the splendor and glory, of his majesty. This is Bill Gates meets Elon Musk meets, a U.S. president all in one. I mean, money, got it. Power, got it. Wealth, got it. Prestige, got it. Position, got it. There were 10,000 Secret Servicemen who were highly trained, elite, special ops soldiers, all with personalized face masks that were assigned to guard the king. He had 2,000 spearmen, 2,000 horsemen, and wherever he went, they went with him, dedicating their life to the sole purpose of keeping him alive. Meaning, if push came to shove, at the drop of a hat, they were willing to step in front of him and take an arrow. And when he would send out his vast armies, said to be somewhere in the millions, he would go with them. Now again, this is like, think spoiled brat rich kid, okay? He probably never met his dad Darius until he was 5, because as it went, the kids would, kings in those days like to make babies, not raise babies. And so they'd make as many babies as they can, pick the finest one of the litter, have the moms raise them in the harem, where they had, as many moms as you can imagine. So they're absolutely spoiled. I mean, if you think how much one mom can spoil a kid, imagine 200 moms, absolutely spoiled, never did a lick of work in his life, never broke a sweat, never got a job, never worked a job, never got a blister, and then gets handed as much money and wealth, power, and sex as you can imagine at 32. So that's King Xerxes, and when he would go out to fight, he would take his throne with him. Now, his throne was something to behold. There was no other throne like it. It was big, it was lavish, and he loved to sit on it. And he made a rule: if you step on the rug around my throne, you die. If you sit on the throne, you die. If you look at my throne and I don't like how you look at it, you die. This throne was the seat and symbol of his might and power, and he would take it wherever he'd go. So he was never not seen sitting on his throne from which he ruled the world, from which he demanded worship, from which his glory emanated from. And so he'd go to the battlefield, and he'd find the highest place to get on the battlefield, and he'd have the throne perched on the battlefield, and then he would sit there eating, drinking, and doing sinning with women, while the armies would devastate his enemies before him. That's this king. And I mentioned earlier, if I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the trailer for the movie 300, a bunch of guys who do a lot of CrossFit and girls who don't wear enough clothes, so I'm not saying you should watch it, if I haven't seen it, it's probably a bad movie. But in that movie, King Xerxes, who the 300 Stratons, what are they called? 300 Spartans go up against, that's this king. Big time, big dude, big wheel, like this is the guy. Unmatched in glory and wealth and power on the planet. Not only that, King Xerxes' bride was beautiful. So he's throwing this party. Why is he throwing a party? Parties are how he keeps guys in line. He's got this vast, growing empire. He's got no access to Twitter, thank God, or Facebook, or email or anything. So he's got to call them in, throw a big party. And he's like, here's the deal. All the food you want, all the drink, you got it. Door prizes, gold, keep it. Women, how many? Name them. They're there. And then he says, this is your tax dollars hard at work. If you would like more where this came from, you follow me. And it was a war council. And for 180 days, he's gathering a war council to go to it would be west to take on Greece, the Greeks. We'll get to in a moment. But in the middle of all that, he's got this beautiful bride. We see enter the story in verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, now I should note here that their thinking was so backward in that time that whenever they got councils together, they would intentionally drink and then make big decisions while they were drunk, because they believed being drunk put them in greater touch with the God spirits, and they would make better decisions. When in actuality, getting drunk put them in touch with demonic spirits. So they're making these demonically guided decisions while they're drunk for 180 days. And this is what happens in that moment. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. Here we go. Let's call them Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass. That's probably what he felt like, a carcass. Anyways, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Now, we're going to stop here and just going to make a few notes. I'm going to come back to this next week. But commentators are pretty agreed upon, when he asked her to show up with her royal crown, that's all he asked her to show up in. Okay? The purpose here is for him to show off the beauty of his queen. The purpose is to make every other man there jealous of what he has. When you're alpha male, that's what you get, men. So we know that Queen Vashti wasn't just average in terms of the eyes of men. She was exceptional in her beauty. He did not pick her for her intellect. He picked her for her physical beauty. Like nobody else has got a bride like Xerxes. He's not going to trot her out if everyone guy's like, I got better home. He's going to trot her out for the sole purpose of stirring jealousy in the heart of every other man. And she's like, no thanks. Now here's where the story turns. Part of the storyteller's tool and strategy is to use parts of the story that kind of change and turn to make us aware that something important is coming. And so King Xerxes is mighty and great and powerful and all sovereign until verse, 12, when a woman enters the story and kind of disrupts the whole scenario. And from here, the tone begins to change of how we're supposed to view King Xerxes. And I'm going to tip you off here to what's going on, okay? This is satire. This is an author painting a picture that is intended to become so ridiculous that our only response is to laugh at it and mock it. This is irony, this is satire, this is comedy. This is the author going, we thought this guy was all that in a bag of chips, but in reality, he's nothing more than a bumbling buffoon who can't even get his wife to show up when he wants because she doesn't respect him. So here's where the story turns. King Xerxes' counselors were many. Chapter 1, verse 12. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Interesting. So here's the picture. I'm having a barbecue with some guys. Honey, bring me some more chips. Come on out here. Sharon, bring me some chips. Nothing. Sharon, bring me some chips. And now I am just torqued. I get on the phone. Adam, Kent, Chris, what are we going to do about my wife who won't come when I want? It's like if I had a domestic dispute with my wife, like a little tiff, and I had to call the council of the elders to figure it out, you'd be like, that guy's not a leader, he's an idiot. Look what happens. Here, verse 13, since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, now right there we're supposed to go, law and justice? Your wife wouldn't show up. You're a bozo, you're a dirtbag, you're a clown. She sees that, decides not to come, and now you're going to go consult the guys for law and justice because you've been slighted? Is your ego that small and that tender and that slight that it's so easily bruised? And here's where the satire begins. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times. That's supposed to be ironic. And were closest to the king. Now here they come. This is Harry, Carrie, Curly, and Mo here. Karshina, we'll call him Karshina. That sounds more feminine. Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mears, Marsena, and Memucan. Memucan. Sounds like a rapper. The 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. So Xerxes had his throne, and these schmucks had their throne around him, and they got special access to him to talk to him, give him counsel. And here's what happens. Guys, according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. It's like, chewed my that kind of hurt. Grow up, dude. Verse 16, here's his wise counsel. Then Memucan, the rapper, replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti's done wrong, dude. Not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and all the people of all the provinces of all the land of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women. And so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she wouldn't come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to the disrespect and discord experienced throughout your kingdom, king. What a total loser. Okay, and you got to read it that way in order to get it, right? They got a little tiff, and they take this small domestic disturbance, and they're going to blow it up into national crisis, okay? Really wise guys, right? I think there's a little King's royal wine talking here. The stupidity continues, verse 19. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, dude, and let it be written in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king Xerxes. Yeah, that'll show her. Yeah, high five, high five. Hey, moron, that's exactly what she wanted. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, come to my presence. She's like, no, I don't like you. He's like, well, okay, then I'll make a law that says that you can never come into my presence anymore. And she's like, thank you, you idiot. I mean, these guys are really sharp, right? It's like, okay, keep going. And also let the king give her royal position to someone else who's better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands finally, from the least to the greatest. Yeah, that'll work. Woo! Another round. Boom. And they sauce themselves up. You see the picture getting painted here? This is the most powerful man in the land with the wisest counsel available, and they look at a small domestic disturbance, blow it up into a national crisis, and their solution is to pass a law that will almost guarantee the abuse of all of the women kingdom-wide at the hand of the husbands in the name of King Xerxes. Is there any ounce of wisdom in that at all? There's none. And this is where the compare and the contrast comes in. They're wise men who are absolute fools. The king is all-powerful and all-wise who listens to these idiots. And then what does he do? He uses his power to institute their foolish counsel, and look what happens. We learn that King Xerxes' word is law. The king and his nobles were pleased with his advice, verse 21. So the king did as Memucan, the rapper, proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household using his native tongue. Consider the economic resources alone it took to get that stupid decree out. Mind-blowing. All because Vashti probably didn't want to get trotted out like a hunk of meat in front of a bunch of drunk frat party bozos. And he's like, we can't let the women take over. We got to make sure they remain lawfully submitted and abused to their husbands in my name. That sounds like good. Put my stamp of approval on it and spend like $1 trillion passing around everyone's tongue. That's King Xerxes. Now you got to ask yourself the question, how in the world would you get that word out? Well, King Xerxes, when he wasn't drunk, he had instituted a pretty brilliant system of communication. And this was the motto for his system of communication. It was a network of horsemen and riders throughout his kingdom. This was their motto. I got to find it here for you. Oh, I lost it. Neither snow nor rain, nor gloom of night stays these valiant couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Recognize that? Yeah, the Point Express adopted that here in the West. And then our United States Postal Service adopted it after them. So if you get a letter with a stamp on it and your name and it came from somewhere around the world and it got to your house, you can thank King Xerxes. That was his idea. That's how he got the word out. Massive economic resources spent to get this new decree out to the world to make sure that women don't get it out of hand in the household. What's the point of this portrait that the author took an entire chapter to paint? The purpose is this. This is a man who, though had wealth and power and might, was an absolute bumbling buffoon with a small ego easily bruised. That this was the mightiest empire in all of the world, with half the world's population subjugated to it, and it was as fragile as a dispute between two people, and it could be fractured. And so that leads us to our big idea number one. Big idea number one is don't take the power and glory of this world too seriously. One of the reasons that chapter 1 is given to us in the book of Esther is to remind us that even men in power and women in power only put their pants on one leg at a time. And you know, we are so easily impressed by power, aren't we? We're so easily impressed by position and by prestige and by money. And we're so easily swayed by people that we view as in positions of power. And we're so easily tempted to follow them or worship them or support them or emulate, they want to become like them. And one of the points of Esther chapter 1 is to say, hey, look, here's the deal. Even the most powerful man on the planet, left to himself, is a bumbling buffoon. So don't take him too seriously. And one of the tools that the authors of the Old Testament would regularly use is the tool of laughter and mocking. You mock power in order to remind yourself that it's only human power. You laugh at power when it's taken too seriously, or you laugh at yourself when you take yourself too seriously to remind yourself that all of us stand before God on level playing field. No matter what we got on our head or what harem we got born into and kingdom we got handed, all of us will stand before a different king and give an account for how we lived our days. And so big idea number 1 from Esther chapter 1 is, hey, wherever you're at as a people of God, support the government, support the community, work for the good of that community like the prophet Jeremiah told the people in captivity. Just don't give too much stake and stock to their power and glory. Because the king was wearing, translucent clothes. It's like the emperor's naked and no one wants to talk about it. And God's saying, hey, this isn't like the speak truth to power thing, but this is like, hey, honor authority. Just don't take it too seriously when they start acting stupid and be shocked, because that's what they're going to do. Big idea number 2 is that no world power can thwart the purposes of God. Relatively speaking, there is no peer currently in our world that could relate to King Xerxes or be compared to him. Half the world's population, 3/4 of the world's wealth, millions of soldiers in his army with a growing kingdom, conquering and consolidating growing lands, 3 million square miles of the globe that he owns and submitted to his power. And even that man could not thwart the purposes of God. Because the irony that we miss in the reading of this story with our modern ears is our lack of knowledge of history. But readers for a few hundred or even 1,000 years after the story was written know exactly what's going to happen here in a few chapters. It's recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus. He documents the fact that 4 years after this war council gathers, King Xerxes leads an army of millions top around the peninsula towards Greece and gets their hiney handed to him. He suffers a shocking defeat, drags his tail home, having suffered this massively humiliating loss that cut deeply into his vast wealth. You can't miss the irony. This man is declaring himself King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He can't even get his wife to show up, and in 4 years he will suffer a massive blow to his kingdom that he personally will never recover from. And what God's telling Esther and the people of Israel and the people of the Old Testament and you as followers of Jesus today is that there is no world power that can thwart the purposes of God. Because even in his stupidity and in his folly and in his exercise of evilness, he is even so setting the stage for God's deliverer to come into the story. The reason that the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation and ends the entire story with this picture of an opulent, beautiful, lavishly garnished city as the city of God is to remind us that there is a more beautiful city coming, ruled by a greater king, and those who get invited to that banquet will never suffer the destiny that the people under this poor king suffered. And even though he was working against the people of God, God's purposes will not be thwarted, so take hope. Because the book of Revelation was written to people that were about to experience extraordinary suffering. And the purpose was, here's a picture of the king that you serve, who's above all kings, so take heart, you're on the winning team. Big idea number 3 is that we're no better than King Xerxes. We're no better than King Xerxes. Remember, one of the points of story is to draw us in, to have our defenses get lowered, to spark our interest, and then to implicate us somewhere in it. One of the ways we're implicated in the story of Esther is that we look at King Xerxes and we think, what a dirtbag, what a slimeball, what a loser, until we realize that we're like King Xerxes. We are all little kings of our life, of our heart, of our little throne, of our little kingdom, and what we want is to be served, and what we want is power, and what we want is glory. Apart from the saving work of Jesus, that's what you want. The only difference between you and me and King Xerxes is resources. If I were to give you all the resources of the world and ask, what would you do with them? On this side of the equation, you would say, I'd give it to the poor, and I'd help Grace City Church build their church. Good for you, Mr. Naive. On the other side of me giving you all the power of the world, it might look differently. Because ultimately, power corrupts ultimately. That's why the Greeks were working on a different system of government as this story is unfolding to the West, called democracy, and we took them up on it because we realized that man is sinful and the heart is deceitful above all things, and no one man can be trusted with ultimate power over anybody because they're going to eventually abuse it and use it for their own good. And so there's a lot of biblical truth underneath why we support a democracy, spreading the power across many men and women and not isolating it in one man. Because if you were given ultimate power over the world, it's not 50-50 whether or not you would use it well. You were given power over your own life and you didn't use it well. Nobody can stand here and say, as the little King Xerxes of my life, I have flawlessly and perfectly and righteously, every moment of my little kingdom's existence, made the right choice. Nobody can say that. Because all of us, apart from Christ, have in us the same seed that could potentially blossom what we see here in chapter 1 in the foolish, fickle, finite, sick, disgusting little man that is King Xerxes. You see, the compare and the contrast of the picture is to help us to see the foolishness of man's power. Think about it. What we see is that while the king's reign may have been vast, it was not universal, just like yours. That while the king's rule may have been ultimate, it was also limited, just like yours. That while the king's wealth may have been extravagant, it was also wasted and eventually lost. While the king's glory may have been unmatched in bringing him worship and admiration, it was short-lived glory, bought cheaply and lost easily. That while King Xerxes' bride may have been beautiful, she was also abused. That while the king's counselors may have been many, their counsel was not wise, it was a counsel of fools. That while King Xerxes' word may have been law, his word was also deeply flawed. That while King Xerxes' reign may have been long, it ultimately came to an end. That while the king's enemies may have been temporarily defeated, they were eventually victorious. That while the King Xerxes could control everyone else, sadly, he could not control himself. That while King Xerxes thought he was the king of kings, his ego was so easily bruised and his power was so easily threatened, he turns out to be a bumbling buffoon in a story full of irony and satire, and that's your story too. You may think you have your enemies defeated, but it's a short-term defeat, and they will eventually defeat you. Now, there's some of you, as we read the story, you think, this guy is nasty, this guy is sick, this guy is perverted, this guy is yucky and gross, and you kind of got up on your self-righteous religious high horse looking down on him. Newsflash, men, let me just make the connection for why you're like Xerxes, or why you could become like Xerxes in a moment apart from the saving grace of God. King Xerxes was a perverted, nasty, sick, lust-filled sex addict. The first woman he married was his brother's wife. And he liked her so much, he went and married his brother's wife's daughter, which would be his niece, and then it was downhill from there. Harems full of hundreds of beautiful women that he could have whenever he wanted to fulfill whatever nefarious and lust-filled desires he had at any given moment of any given day. But don't think you're any better, because some of you in this room have the same thing he had in reality. You have it digitally on your hard drive. What King Xerxes had in reality, you have digitally on your phone. And the only difference between you and King Xerxes is resources. But let's not get up on our high horse and think, well, I would never do that. No, men. The demonic power of lust is after you. Jesus said if you look upon a woman lustfully and you have sinned against her and God in your heart, and you'll be held accountable for that sin as if you had done the act physically. Let's not give ourselves permission, men, to get off the hook for the kind of sick and nefarious actions we see King Xerxes doing, and then excuse ourselves when we do the very same thing online with hundreds of different women. So let's not quickly condemn his overindulgence and let ourselves off the hook. The story is meant to draw us in, go, yuck, that's gross, and then go, one finger pointed at him means three back at me. What would I do if I had ultimate power? What would I do if I had all the wealth in the world? What would I do if I could do whatever I wanted and would not be held accountable for it, quote unquote, as long as I could make it last? But that's where the other king that's painted here in chapter 1 comes to light, which leads us to our fourth big idea, and that is that Jesus is the better king. Xerxes thought he was the king of kings, and he made a lousy king of kings. Some of you think you're a good king of kings for your life. Newsflash, you make a lousy sovereign over your life. There's only one king who's worthy of sovereign power in your life or in the world, and it's not you, it's not King Xerxes, it's not me, it's King Jesus. And you might be thinking, now, where is Jesus in this story? All I saw was a portrait painted of a despicable, deplorable, disgusting, depraved idiot who batters and abuses women and drinks and eats a lot. You remember a few weeks ago when we read John chapter 6? What did Jesus say about Esther in the Old Testament? He said, when you read the Old Testament, it's writing about me. And then remember what Jesus said in Luke 24? When he was on the road to Emmaus with the disciples, he opened their eyes and he read from them the Old Testament, and he pointed out how what Moses wrote and the prophets wrote and the narratives told about and the Psalms wrote, they were all about him. And then you remember Peter and Paul preaching sermons through the book of Acts and how they used the scripture to point to Jesus, and they didn't have Romans, they had Esther, they had the Old Testament. And so we ask ourselves the question, how in the world did Jesus think Esther was about him? Let me help you. The glaring omission of Esther is God, which is its genius. Esther shows us how a story goes in an individual's life when there is no God. And yet, when there is seemingly no presence of God, he is still powerfully present and at work, providentially bringing all circumstances under his reign, rule, and control, so that chapter 1 through 10 is in story form what Romans 8:28 is in a sentence. And behold, I will work all things together for the good of those who are called according to my purpose and who love me. So we see the book of Esther as a 10-chapter story telling about the providence of God even when we don't see him at work. And some of you have a godless life. You might believe in God, but you don't see him anywhere you look. Not in your relationships, not in your circumstances, not in your life. Where did he go? And the book of Esther stands to say the king is still there. Just because you don't see him, don't make the mistake of assuming he's not working. Even through evil people, even through unjust circumstances, to bring about his glory and the good of the people who love him and submitted to his reign and his kingdom. Now, here's what I want you to see. In the book of Esther, we're never going to see an explicit picture of Jesus painted. We're going to see the nuanced shadowing and silhouetting of Jesus as the artist paints a picture of that which is despicable and that's what we despise. So when an artist paints a picture, they can paint a picture of something that's crystal clear and pops off the page with detail and coloring and all sorts of texture. But what an artist can also do is it can use the details and the texture of the object of its drawing to then shape a silhouetted figure that's even bigger that you see when you step back and look at the whole picture. So you could look at a picture of a rose, and it's detailed color, very vibrant. This is Xerxes. And then in how the rose is painted, the silhouette around it, boom, it's a mountain range. And what you first only saw was this flower kind of wilted, and you look back, and the silhouette that the flower created is this massively gorgeous mountain range. That's like the book of Esther. We're looking at the book of Esther, and the book of Esther is historically one of the last books written in the Old Testament. The only thing that happened in the biblical narrative after Esther is a few years later, Nehemiah goes and builds the walls, and then it's done. So as the last snapshot or portrait in our mind of the Old Testament, before there's 400 years of silence, is this opulent, spoiled, sick, sadistic brat of a king who uses his power and wealth and authority to conquer people and kill people and abuse women and indulge himself. And that's the last picture of a king that we have in the Old Testament before 400 years of silence, and then Matthew 1 with the genealogy of a new king who arrives on the scene. The purpose of Esther is to get us to go, is all of human history just a story of one dirtbag after another dirtbag somehow getting to power and then wielding his power to abuse people? That's just so cliche anymore. Is that all there is? And the story of Esther stands to say, no, step back from the detailed picture, look at the silhouette that God's painting. Jesus is there. So that above Xerxes' throne is a bigger throne and Jesus is on it. Above Xerxes' power is Jesus' power. Above Xerxes' foolishness is Jesus' wisdom. Above Xerxes' wealth is Jesus' wealth. Above Xerxes' kingdom is Jesus' kingdom. And at every turn and in every way, Jesus as king and Jesus' kingdom is better. Which means you have a choice. You can follow the King Xerxes of your life, which it might be you, or it might be sex or money or power or friends or popularity or safety or security or job ladder climbing or whatever you might fill in the blank with your little king. You can serve that king, and you're going to get to see how that will go in this story, or you can trade your small king for a big king. You can trade your false king for a true king. You can trade your demonically influenced king for the divinely king, Jesus Christ, the divinely filled man, Jesus Christ. The story of Esther serves as just a profound backdrop that silhouettes the true King Jesus, so that though we only see a painting of one king given to us, we see a portrait of a new and better king rising from the page. Because while King Xerxes' reign was vast, Jesus' reign is galactic. While Xerxes ruled with a heavy hand, Jesus rules with a steady hand. While King Xerxes' wealth was fleeting and finite, Jesus' wealth is forever and infinite. While King Xerxes used his wealth to indulge himself, Jesus uses his wealth to bless other people. Xerxes' glory was unmatched on earth for a moment in time, but Jesus' glory is unmatched in all of the universe for all of time. Xerxes exalted himself and then had to order people to bow down to him as God, but God himself exalted King Jesus, so that at the mere mention of his name at the end of all times, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. No arm twisting needed. It'll be so painfully obvious that there is no king above this king. That's the real King of Kings. King Xerxes said, I'm the King of Kings. And we're like, no, you're the king of morons. That's the King of Kings over your small kingdom right there. That's the one. There will be no question in the end who rules over the universe. Xerxes' bride was used, shamed, demeaned, and abused by his own hand, but King Jesus' bride will be washed clean, made new, forgiven, made whole, cherished, and protected at the hand of King Jesus. Xerxes used his bride for his own selfish gain. Jesus sacrificed himself for his bride's benefit and blessing. Xerxes' counselors were buffoons and fools. Jesus needs no counselors because he is the source of wisdom and truth himself. Xerxes turned his foolish opinions into law that resulted in the oppression of people. Jesus' word is good and true and beautiful, and his law is perfect, and it brings blessing to his people. Xerxes' rule was temporary and it came to an end. Jesus' rule will never end. Xerxes' enemies eventually defeated him. Jesus' enemies right now stand completely defeated. Xerxes' love was fickle and selfish. Jesus' love is lasting and selfless. Xerxes' ego was big and easily bruised. Jesus knows who he is and is not intimidated or embarrassed. Xerxes was the son of a man, but Jesus is the son of God. Xerxes killed his enemies with an army of millions, but Jesus died for his enemies, saving billions. Xerxes said he would rule wherever the sun set, but only Jesus causes the sun to rise and causes the sun to set. Xerxes died, and today nobody worships King Xerxes as God, but King Jesus rose from the dead, and today millions and billions of people worship him as God. Xerxes' kingdom had subjects from many nations, but Jesus' kingdom has joyful worshipers drawn out of every nation. Xerxes threw enormous banquets, but the one Jesus is preparing for us makes his pale in comparison. Xerxes' kingdom came to an end. Jesus' kingdom has no end. Xerxes declared himself King of Kings, and then he died, and then he stood before the judge and the one who is the King of Kings and who is the Lord of Lords, and who today says, you can be my subject, I can be your king, and life will be good. You can trade today your small, sick, pathetic little king for the big, great, glorious, mighty King of Kings, King Jesus. Amen? And we have waiting for us. We have waiting for us a banquet that he is preparing that'll make this party look like a popsicle stand. And it's not just a banquet that we'll get to enjoy as his subjects for a few days and then go back down to the small village where we got to scratch out a living. He's going to invite us up to the palace, not as conquered subjects, but as loved sons and daughters, not as visitors for a few days, but as family members of his kingdom for eternity. This is a king who doesn't go out and conquer his enemies and crush them and subjugate them. This is the king, King Jesus, who conquers our enemy, death, and then invites us, his former enemy, into his family. You do not know another king like this king, King Jesus. One king got talked about in chapter 1, but one king is desired and longed for in chapter 1, and it's not King Xerxes, and it's not King you, it's King Jesus. Amen? King Jesus. King Jesus. And so, Father, I'm praying and I'm asking in that King Jesus' name that wherever we may be looking to, turning to, submitting to, worshiping small, pathetic King Xerxes in our lives, that you would show them for the buffoons that they are. That you would show us how foolish they are and how silly they are and how stupid they are. And we would turn from those small kings to worship King Jesus. And Father, if there is somebody here this morning that did not know Jesus before they walked in the door, that you would convict them by your Holy Spirit. You would open their eyes to see that they have been worshiping themselves as a little god, or they've been worshiping their spouse or their kid or a sport or a car or a house or a job or a position or a dollar amount in their bank account, and that those little gods can never deliver on the need that they have in their heart. That those gods can never deliver on the promise that they make to satisfy. There's only one king who can satisfy. There's only one king who can save. There's only one king who can deliver on his promise of deliverance, and that is King Jesus. And would you show yourself to them even now? That you would draw them by faith through grace, that they would repent and believe and place their faith in Jesus and be made a member of his kingdom that's better than any kingdom, his kingdom that's bigger than any kingdom, his kingdom that will outlast any human kingdom on the planet. And Lord, as we look to that king, we would see and sense hope rising in our hearts. We have no warrant for despair. We have no reason to be discouraged. We serve the King of Kings, and even when we cannot see his hand at work, we can know for sure he is still powerfully present, bringing about providentially his purposes for his glory and our good. We thank you, Father, for that promise found in that King. And would you draw more men and women, we pray, in this valley to that King. Would you use us as your church to help more people meet King Jesus, love King Jesus, and follow King Jesus for the glory of Jesus and for our good. We ask all of these things. Amen.